Good evening, everyone. This is Hong, Regional Director of ICE Hong Kong. Welcome all of you to join today's webinars on further learning exam. I understand it's a very important matter for many of our graduate members. ICE further learning exam offers an alternative way to achieve the academic requirements to become a C-Eng MICE. So I understand many of our graduate members are very interested in this topic, and I welcome all of you again today. Can you move to the next slide, please? Right. So we are very glad to have Adrian Coy, ICE Further Learning Exam Panel Chairman, to share with us the background of the ICE Further Learning Exam, the further learning options available, and then afterwards, we will pass over to Alan Ryan to share with us the arrangement of Hong Kong pilot exam, the support materials that will be available to our pilot exam candidates, and how can you apply for that pilot exam. So without further ado, I will now pass the stage to Adrian. So Adrian, please.
Thanks, Hong, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to just explain some of the background to the exam and where it sits within ICE's qualification processes. And then Ellen will talk a little bit more about how we plan to run the Hong Kong pilot at this stage. So there are 3 stages in attaining professional membership of ICE. The first is that we need to satisfy ourselves that candidates have the right education base. We then look at the record of initial professional development before candidates sit the professional review. And this process that we're going to talk about this evening is purely about the test for the educational base for a chartered engineer. So this is being complicated a little or quite a bit by changes to what is known as the Washington Accord, which looks at the level of degree courses globally and make sure that they are all to a common standard. It was determined that an accredited MEng course bachelor degree for Hong Kong graduates were on courses started before the 1st of July 2015. And an accredited BEng honours degree with appropriate further learning for Washington Accord standard students starting in 1st of July 2015. From 2019, graduates with bachelor's degrees covered by the Washington Accord degree, that is those started before 2015, will need to complete some further learning to demonstrate master's level learning that satisfies Chartered Engineer MICE, which is the ICE qualification. That's in common with all engineering standards in the UK, satisfied by the Engineering Council. So to simplify further learning options, the ICE's academic qualifications panel that looks at academic qualifications for all applicants confirmed that Washington Accord accredited BEng honours graduates should be given the same further learning options, which is it recognised that it would be possible for those with a BEng honours graduates to complete further formal academic programme such as a master's degree, or several alternative options, and these are shown on the slide. So it is accredited MSc programmes, the experiential learning route, which checks what learning has been gained through experience over approximately 5 years, or the further learning exam, which is what we're focusing on this evening. Just looking at those in a little bit more detail, we will continue to accredit MSc programmes in Hong Kong, so that option is available to candidates. And indeed, we have completed a virtual visit to Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, I believe, this week. And there are further visits to University of Hong Kong later this month. That is just making sure that the MSc courses in Hong Kong meet ICE requirements. The experiential learning option is something that was encouraged by the Engineering Council, and it requires candidates with several years work experience, and we recommend a minimum of 5 years to produce a series of short reflective statements of around about 500 words a statement that demonstrate how they have met the appropriate master's level learning outcomes. The further option that we have introduced is that during 2018 and 2019, we started looking at the potential for an exam to satisfy that further learning standard, to make sure that it was to a master's level. So the ICE Further Learning Examination panel was formed in 2018-2019. I've been chairing that panel since then, to look at how to best assess that candidates have reached a master's level of learning. We've been working in collaboration with ICE Training to develop a syllabus for the exam, and to develop online learning material. The syllabus aligns closely with the attributes required for the Chartered Professional Review. So if you look at the attributes, you'll find a very close correlation with the modules that I'm going to talk about in a moment. And that meets the requirements of what is known as the UK Standard for Professional Engineering Competence, which is set out by the Engineering Council. So we can move on to the next slide, Jessica, please. So the syllabus is split into 5 modules. The first is procurement, contracts and project management. The second is management and leadership. The third is project appraisal and financial management. Fourth is health, safety, welfare and risk assessment. And the fifth is sustainable development. And as I've said, that fits very closely to what the reviewers will be looking at in terms of the Chartered Professional Review. We look at testing that in an examination format through a case study format, and that is, we describe in the exam a case study and then ask candidates to answer questions relating to that case study. But those questions are looking at the knowledge that candidates have gained in these 5 syllabus areas, these modules. And we decided to do that for a specific reason, that you may have learned a lot on project appraisal about critical path analysis, for example. But rather than just ask you to describe critical path analysis, we give you a scenario and look at how you actually apply that knowledge to that specific scenario. And indeed, it might be a mix of using critical path analysis, it might be using Microsoft Project, it might be using other techniques that you will need to apply to solve the problem in the scenario. So the case study is intended to be one that may not be in your normal field of work. So you maybe have a specialism in structures, maybe a specialism in transportation, highways, or rail, or on the water side of the industry. Those 5 modules apply equally, whichever discipline you happen to be working in. So we give a scenario that may not be related directly to what you are doing now, but these syllabus areas are general and are basically the core attributes that we look at for a civil engineer, chartered engineer. So candidates will need to demonstrate how they're learning together with the materials that we've provided in terms of the online modules, will help demonstrate that you have that knowledge across those areas. You will be gaining knowledge since you took your bachelor's degree, your first degree. You will be learning through work. You'll be learning through work experience. You may have done IPD, initial professional development training. Your employer may be providing you with some training. All of that comes together with the online materials and will be used by you to answer the questions in the exam. We will also refer in the modules to further reference reading books, and we have a list of books that you may want to refer to and study in order to gather the knowledge that you need to take the exam. The key element of the exam, and we will be looking at further training on the exam between now and the first exam, and Ellen may talk about that later. But the key element is that you must answer the questions that are set in the exam, and at the same time demonstrate the knowledge across the syllabus. The exam is a one-day exam, 7 hours, allowing for a break for lunch. And that gives time to plan the answers and to plan that each of the syllabus areas that you're able to demonstrate knowledge across the syllabus areas, and to answer the questions themselves. It is an open book exam, and because we now have this is an online exam, you could use the internet to find information. What I would say is that although 7 hours seems a long time, a full day seems a long time for an exam, it is fairly intense, and you will spend most of your time on your keyboard answering the questions. So the more that you can remember, the more that you have learned and is stored in your brain, the less you'll have to refer to other materials, whether they be on your laptop, on the internet, or a book at the side of you. What the key is that we're actually wanting to know what you've learnt rather than what you can research. But it is open book, and so those options are available. Next slide, please, Jessica. So, as part of developing the exam, we've now held 2 pilots to test the exam process, and not only for the candidates, but also to test the marking process to make sure that we're consistent and fair in the way that we mark the exam. So the first pilot was held in September 2019. That was held at 1 Great George Street, ICE's headquarters, as a desk-based written exam. And we had interest initially from 28 candidates. As it happened, some were not able to make it on the day. So we had 17 candidates that sat the exam, and 14 of those candidates passed. We marked the papers as a panel. So my panel that have helped develop this exam and the questions marked this for that first pilot. And then we had a moderation session for if there was any disagreement between markers. We had a meeting where we discussed those papers and finally agreed those who had passed and those who had failed, and the pass rate turned out to be around about 80%. The second exam was planned to be held in the autumn of 2020, autumn last year, but that was delayed because of COVID, and so we had to rapidly develop an online exam using a company that specialises in holding online exams. And so the pilot that was held in March this year was to test that exam process further, to test the online, but we increased the number of candidates as well. So instead of 17 candidates, we had more than 40 candidates, and instead of the panel marking all of the papers, we trained some markers from ICE members. Half of them are academic, half of them are industrial, and we pair them in that way for doing the marking. And then the panel did the moderation between where there was disagreement between markers. So we've developed a fairly robust marking system. There weren't as many successful candidates. It was around about 50% this time passed. But we had a good testing of the system. We felt it was more consistent. There were less disagreements between markers. So we feel that we've got a fairly consistent marking regime in place, and it is a fair exam. We will continue to run the exam in the UK. The UK candidates with a bachelor's degree are coming forward to sit the exam as an alternative to do the assessment route. And so it will be both Hong Kong applicants and UK applicants who sit the exam going forward. And the next test is to run this pilot in Hong Kong. And Ellen is now going to talk through the arrangements that we have in place for the Hong Kong pilot. And then after Ellen has talked about those arrangements, we will have a Q&A session, and I'll come back and answer some of the questions in the Q&A. Ellen.
Thanks, Adrian. Jessica, next slide, please. Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the Hong Kong pilot exam that we will be holding online on the 4th of October. The exam is now in 2 stages, and we've had to update the exam criteria to ensure that we meet the new Engineering Council requirements that Adrian mentioned previously in the UK specification for a chartered engineer. The exam will now be split into 2 parts. Part A is the submission of a 500-word technical report statement that we're going to ask candidates to produce in advance, but submit online as part of the exam registration process. Ideally, normally 3 weeks before the exam date. Next slide, please, Jessica. This is the technical statement. I'm including it here just to allow you to see what it looks like, to read it. It will be included in the guidance document that we will send. We're developing for the Hong Kong pilot candidates, but also going forward for all candidates sitting the further learning exam. This is a new part of the exam, and we will be using you as pilot candidates to actually test how this assessment of the technical statement works. So that's why we're in pilot for the first exam in Hong Kong, to allow us to test this element of the exam. Next slide, please, Jessica. The second part of the exam, as Adrian's already mentioned, is the online exam. And it's the online exam which is the case study requirements that Adrian's mentioned. You will get a case study booklet with a list of questions that you're expected to answer. And for this second March pilot, we ask candidates to write 6 answers, which is why, as Adrian said, it's pretty intense. And we're opening the exam online at 8 o'clock in our time in the UK. Next slide, please. Adrian has already mentioned that we've been working with colleagues across the ICE group to develop support material to help candidates preparing for the ICE further learning exam. One of the areas that we've worked on quite successfully is with our colleagues in ICE training to develop online modules to support the key syllabus areas. And we're giving free access to these online training modules for the pilot exam candidates. Once we're out of pilot phase, any candidate wanting to sit the exam, there will be a charge for using these modules. But we've got agreement with colleagues in ICE training that this is free for the pilot candidates. And as Adrian said, we've run the exam now twice. And one of the documents the exam panel produce after each exam is an examiner's report. And this is where the examiner gives general feedback on how candidates answered the exam question to help give a better guidance to candidates following on as they prepare to sit the exam. Adrian and the panel are also working with colleagues in IC Publishing to develop a textbook that's been designed to support the reading list, and we hope to be available for candidates sitting the exam in 2022. One area that we will also be able to support you with, we will be running a briefing session for the actual registered pilot candidates to go through the exam day in more detail with them, but also give them an opportunity to see what the online system looks like, and explain how they use it during the day. So that session will be taking place, but there may also be an opportunity for the Hong Kong team, for Jessica and Hong and colleagues, to see if they can put in place candidate study groups to allow you to come together as a group to talk through the exam syllabus area and potentially look at answering some of the previous case study exam questions to give you a feel for how the exam will operate. Next slide, please, Jessica. So as I mentioned earlier, the online exam is on the 4th of October. Adrian's mentioned the moderation process. So we're hoping at the moment that candidates will receive their results on the 18th of November. As I've said before, the exam is free to the pilot candidates, and we're looking for 50 candidates who are graduate members of the ICE, who have a minimum of 2 years experience and hold an accredited bachelor degree at the appropriate level to be our pilot candidates. Registration, we're not charging you an exam fee. Registration is free, the exam is free, the support material is free, and we're looking to get 50 candidates, as I've said, to be our test group, and we will register candidates on a first come, first served basis. So you'll be asked to send an email to the ICE team, to the exam team, who to allow us to register you and check your eligibility. And details on this process will be followed up after this event by Hong and colleagues, who will send through an email with all these details. Jessica, I'm not sure if there's another slide, please. I think that's all from me, and it's now for you to log your questions, and we'll answer them as best we can. Adrian.
Thanks, Ellen. Yes, please, if you could type your questions into the box, and then I'll read them out and answer if I can. Although we asked for some instructions to how to find the question and answer box.
Adrian and Ellen, actually there's one question from the audience. Is there a list of accredited MSc programs that you can make reference on?
There is, Hong. The list of accredited MSc programs is available on our accreditation website. We accredit jointly with other professional bodies through a group that's known as Joint Board Moderators, and you can find the list of accredited MSc programs on that JBM website. Candidates should also be able to find it using the ICE course search tool, which is on the ICE website.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you. Okay, so there's another question. Does it mean that graduates who those who graduate in June 2019 are eligible to enroll in this exam? I believe that is a yes, because they are provided that they have over 2 years of experience of working in the civil engineering field.
It really depends on the date of graduation, Hong, because that's the transfer dates. So if you just allow me, I'll double check that for you to confirm that.
Thank you.
One of the audience was early question, Hong, was asking about what it's going to cost going forward for the exam. We're still working on the pricing model for that, and we'll let you know that in the next couple of weeks. But at the moment, it's I know the online training material is in the region of £500.
What information needs to be included in the exam application email, Ellen? That's another question.
We're just asking for candidates who are ICE graduate members, and this is only open at the moment to ICE graduate members, which answers one of the questions in the chat line, because we'll have your details online. Because you're graduate members, we can validate your entry eligibility. So all we need at the moment is just an email from you.
An email from you, and it would be great if you can also provide your ICE membership number.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So to answer another question in the chat room, at the moment, the pilot exam is only open to ICE graduate member. So if you are HKIE graduate member but not an ICE graduate member, then you are not eligible to this pilot exam.
And there was another question about whether that whether the 50 candidates that we're looking for is a worldwide number. No, this pilot is purely for Hong Kong graduates, so we're looking for 50 Hong Kong graduates for this pilot. And the actual exam beyond the pilot, we will be running in 2022. And I'm thinking we're looking at about the same time of year for Hong Kong, so it'll be October sort of timing.
So how many questions or essays will there be in the exam?
That is in the two pilots that we have run so far. There have been 6 questions, but that is something that we will be reviewing. It is, as I said, a fairly intense period, and we may look at 5 questions or answering 5 from the 6, or something like that. So it's a fairly intense. Our thinking on the 6 was that in a 7-hour exam, you can take about an hour to do the planning, and really just develop some answer plans to make sure that you're getting all of the knowledge across the syllabus into the answers, and then an hour each for the 6 questions. But as I said, some candidates are running out of time to answer all 6 questions, so we may review that, and we have a panel. We will be considering that in the next month or so, based on what we've learned from the second pilot. We haven't finished our review of the second pilot yet.
In answer to the earlier question, Hong, the graduates who started their degree programme before 1st of July 2015 do not need further learning. So if your caller started after 1st of July 2015, then they would be eligible to sit the exam. But eligibility is something we will check when candidates apply for the exam.
I'm looking at two questions from Gavin Toe here that are basically getting down to the same thing. Basically, the first question is, would the same questions be used for candidates from different countries? And he's clarified that as will the questions be set for a local Hong Kong context? The questions are based really on for any candidate, and if you look at the areas of the syllabus, it does talk about contract, forms of contract and things like that. It does talk about health and safety. It talks about environmental issues. You know, the 5 areas of the syllabus, and they are common. Those areas of the syllabus are common to all graduates. I'm aware that you have different standards in Hong Kong. You may use slightly different forms of contract, and that's fine. And you can really apply those forms of contract, the standards that you work to, the health and safety legislation that you work to. You can apply that to answer the question. But it really doesn't matter whether the scenario is based in Hong Kong or whether it's based in Africa or London or wherever. You know, you looking to apply your knowledge, and you can refer to Hong Kong materials and the way that you work in Hong Kong, and it's yeah, I mean, it's basically apply how you work in Hong Kong, but use the knowledge that you're gaining through study as well. We take you out of your comfort zone. One of the elements of the exam is just to test you outside your comfort zone a little bit. Sorry, Ellen.
So somebody's asking about will we accept registration from graduate members who completed training in HKE ICE? All that we're asking at the moment is that they're graduate members of the ICE. We're not restricting it any further in terms of training and experience.
There's a question about if you decide to take an accredited MSc program, do you need to submit anything similar on reflective learning? The answer to that is no. If you have passed an accredited MSc, then you will that will be looked at, but should be okay to progress to the Chartered Professional Review with the initial professional development report direct. So if you've got an MSc, that's fine.
One of the candidates is talking about the fact that if they're chartered with another professional body, such as the Institution of Structural Engineers, there are ways to get chartered through the iStructE. They have their own requirements. They have their own membership examination, which is part of their membership process as well. IHE have their own requirements, and I think IHE use an experiential learning option. They wouldn't be, they're not party to this exam. That's just the Institution of Civil Engineers.
Ellen, I think that question is referring to the reciprocal recognition arrangement. So would the legal requirements on master level learning affect the current reciprocal recognition arrangement between ICE and other professional institutions?
Well, in the UK, the requirement for master's level learning has been in place for students starting courses since 1999. So that hasn't changed. So if there's a reciprocal arrangement between the ICE and the ISTRAT-T, the ISTRAT-T would probably be looking for master's level learning from our members. But I do know they have their own way of dealing with that for people who don't have master's level learning.
There was a question about if you pass the pilot, will you then have to take the next stage exam in 2022? And the answer to that is no. If you pass the pilot exam, you have passed the exam, and you would be able to then apply for your chartered professional review. So it's a pilot, but it is the equivalent of the exam proper. So if you pass, you progress to the chartered professional review.
There's a question here, Adrian, about minimum work experience for eligibility for the exam, and if this will remain at 2 years in the coming years. I think for UK candidates, we're expecting 4 to 5 years experience, and I think Hong Kong we're saying around 2 years, and that probably won't change.
There was a question about when can we expect the actual exam to happen in Hong Kong in next year. I think Adrian already mentioned that it will be in around October time, similar to this pilot exam. So maybe you can say around Q4 next year we will have an actual exam, actual ICE further learning exam for Hong Kong candidates.
Yeah.
Am I correct, Adrian?
Yes, that's our target.
Yes, great.
There's a question here that if I join the pilot exam, may I join the formal exam at the same time? I think I've answered that already, basically, that the pilot exam is an exam, and it's part of the process towards chartered professional review. So there's no difference between a pilot exam and the formal exam that we will be running next year. If you pass the pilot exam, you will be entitled to move forward to the chartered professional review. So the pilot is basically because we're testing the system, but we take it as an exam, and if you pass, you pass, and you don't then need to take the exam again next year. So the two things are separate.
Oh, there's a question asking if I am currently at ING level qualification and studying a bachelor degree in civil engineering, will I be able to take the ICE exam?
Not if it's an ING only degree, no, because the exam has been designed to map across the BEng Honours level learning outcomes. If you've got an ING only degree, we would recommend you look at experiential learning or consider completing an MSc.
Thank you. Thank you, Ellen. There's one question asking is that mentor supported training scheme will no longer be a way for further learning from 2022. I think the mentor supported training scheme is part of the IPD. It's not about the educational base. So they're two separate things, and therefore that the ICE further learning exam has no impact on the mentor support training scheme.
No, yes, I agree with you, Hong. There's another related question to practical experience where they're saying if I finish the training in a HKIE, can I join the further learning exam for meeting the MSc requirement? And the answer is yes, you can.
The question here, if I graduated in 2020, will that be eligible to take the exam? I think that is basically the question. I think what Ellen explained is that we're really looking for further learning over 2 years beyond the BEng before you take the exam. We're really looking for the equivalent level of learning for someone who has taken a master's degree. A master's degree is generally a year course. So if you're doing part-time study alongside work, it's probably going to be 2 years before you've reached that same level of learning. So it's really looking to take this around about 2 years after your BEng, after you get your BEng degree. That is the recommendation.
One of the questions as well, I think what we're saying is the ICE further learning exam will remain a further learning option beyond 2022. So it will become part of the ICE's further learning offering. It's just the next exam would be the first real exam, so to speak, not pilot, will be in 2022. And then we're looking to hopefully run it at least annually thereafter.
For those currently planning to do experiential learning, would it be possible to register for the ICE exam as a backup while waiting for the results of experiential learning? I suppose that's possible. Ellen, do you want to expand?
It's possible, but then what we would do is if you pass further learning, experiential learning, we would remove you from the ICE exam because you don't need to sit the exam because you already meet the further learning requirements for chartered engineer. Are there other questions coming through, Hong?
Yes, there are still quite a number of questions.
Because I think Adrian's screen's frozen at the moment.
Sorry, I'm scrolling through some. I'm having trouble finding any that we haven't answered, actually. Can you see any, Hong, that we haven't yet?
Yeah, I'm looking at the questions. I think we have answered most of them already. Just bear with me if I can see other new questions. There's one question, say if I fail my first attempt of the IC exam, can I take the exam in the next years? I think the answer is yes. You can make another attempt of the IC exam in the following years.
Yes, we generally, if in the failure letter, if people do fail, we do give recommendations of when it can be resit.
There's another question asking, going forward, how many times, how many IC exam will that be available per year? Will that be just once per year or twice or more?
That's something the further learning exam panel is going to be considering once the pilot processes have been completed. It will definitely be held at least once a year. Whether we move to 2 times a year is something the panel is going to be considering.
It has changed a little with us moving to an online system, in that you know, it would be possible for candidates in Hong Kong, the UK, or anywhere else globally to sit the exam at the same time. So whereas we've started on this process thinking it would be based in an exam room and we would be running one in London and one in Hong Kong, but with an online system it gives us more flexibility, so that is one of the things that we will be reviewing.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Alan. Another question: how long is the result? Will the results of the IC exam be valid for? I think there is no expiry date for the IC exam results. So if you pass, then you don't need to worry about the results being expired.
Yes, I mean the test is. As I've said, the route to Chartered Professional Review is demonstrating that you have the academic base, which is an MSc or an MEng equivalent, that you have the initial professional development signed off, and then you can take the Chartered Professional Review. So if you have passed the exam, you have demonstrated that your level of learning is at a master's level. So, and that would stay with you until you have the time, until you're in a position to take the professional review. So we're testing that your knowledge is at master's level.
Right. Actually, from my side, I think I think we have answered most, if not all, questions from the audience. So considering we are about to, this session is about to finish, I think if all audience can see the replay of this session if they want to hear from Adrian and Alan again. So that we will there will be a link for you to see the replay of this session. And if you have other questions about IC exam or the pilot exam of Hong Kong, please feel free to contact the Hong Kong office. So we will try our best to answer your questions. And I think this about time to finish today's briefing session. Thanks a lot, Adrian. Thanks a lot, Alan, for your valuable input and introduction of IC Further Learning Exam and the Hong Kong pilots. So thank you all for your time and attention. So any questions on IC exam and pilots, please feel free to contact Hong Kong office. So that's the end of today's session. And good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, and good luck to all the candidates.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good luck in the future.